I'm Matt Ahluwalia. I work in Ashden's Sustainable Towns and Cities team alongside Emma and Frida and Simon, who are also on this call. It's really nice to see you all. Next slide, please, Frida. So a little bit about Ashden and who we are before we talk about the Resilient Roots project. So Ashden, as Emma said, is a climate change charity founded initially to deliver the Ashden Awards. This is a program in its 25th year where we look for global innovators when it comes to climate solutions in the UK and the global south. And on the photo you can see on the right there is our winners from 2024, which included nature solutions from Uganda all the way to Cumbria. But alongside that, in the UK, we work to support councils, communities and schools to deliver more impactful action on climate mitigation and adaptation. And what this looks like in person is that we deliver a range of networks, including this one today, but we also produce publications to share best practice when it comes to climate policy, climate initiatives and engagement. Next slide, please. So a bit more on the Sustainable Towns and Cities team at Ashden. So we basically exist to produce tools and resources that support and equip councils and community groups to take better action on topics such as retrofit energy, community engagement, and nature adaptation. Two examples of toolkits we've produced in the past couple of years include our Climate Action Co-Benefits Toolkit, which my colleague Simon will put a link to in the chat. This is all about how we can look at the co-benefits of climate change and climate action, so better job opportunities, health prospects, social impacts, to frame climate action in that sort of way to get greater buy-in and delivery. We also created a toolkit called the 31 Actions for Councils, which is supporting local authorities with 31 costed policies that they can implement to tackle the climate crisis today. On top of that, some networks which are relevant for this audience. We have a national local authority adaptation network, which brings together over 150 local authorities to share best practice and tackle problems when it comes to adaptation planning. And we also have a Green Communities Network, which brings together lots of different community groups across the UK to connect and share best practice opportunities and challenges when it comes to community engagement. And finally, through all our work, we take a co-benefits approach. So as I mentioned with our co-benefits toolkit, whatever our work, our networks, our publications are focusing on, we will always look at how not only can we cut carbon or improve our resilience to climate impacts, but also how can opportunities for action here support economic benefits, how can they improve health outcomes, how can they tackle social cohesion issues, just to name a couple of things. Next slide, please, Frida. So when it comes to Resilient Roots is a standalone separate project that aims to boost the resilience of the Northwest, specifically of England, to climate impacts. We aim to do this through three main routes. So first of all, by bringing together key stakeholders to forge new relationships and increase collaboration through 4 workshops in 2025, the first of which is this today. On top of that, we'll be running a storytelling campaign highlighting inspiring stories of action on nature within the Northwest to influence key decision makers. And we're really keen to hear about your stories, the people on this call today. What action are you taking, and how can we share that story more widely? And finally, we have a mentorship program which will offer support and upskilling to people working on nature in the Northwest region, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But I just wanted to also say a special thanks to Manchester City Council, Liverpool City Council, Lancashire Wildlife Trust and Cumbria Action for Sustainability. Those groups were amongst a set of organisations we consulted and had discussions with when we were setting up the Resilient Roots programme. And I believe that those 4 are on, or members of those 4 groups are on the call today. So we just wanted to say a very massive thank you for your help in setting up this project. Next slide, please. So our mentorship programme. So this is a scheme which we'll be launching to give stakeholders in the Northwest free access to paid expertise when it comes to adaptation projects or nature-based solutions. To access the support, we'll be asking you to complete a brief expression of interest form with a deadline of the 10th of April. This basically just asks for a little bit of information about your organisation, but also what kind of support you require. If you yourself want to be a mentor, we also have a separate mentor application form which offers 3 days of paid work at £300 a day to offer support to a mentee when it comes to nature and adaptation projects. And I'll be sharing links to all of those things in the chat shortly. And finally, so as Emma mentioned, we'll be doing a bit of stakeholder mapping later in the session. So we'll be using an online virtual tool called Padlet, which I'll share a link to later. But essentially, this allows people to share information about their projects, contacts, lots of different things like that. So if you're happy and willing to share details of who you are and what you're working to, we'll invite you to share this onto our Padlet board. And if anyone hasn't used Padlet before, it's very simple to use. If you look at the first arrow on the left, you'll see a plus button. This allows you to basically add information to that column. So for example, you can add your name and what you're working on to that first column. When you click that plus button, this pop-up where you see the second red arrow will pop up. And this allows you to write some text. You can add a photo or a link or that kind of thing. I would also like you to share if there's anything you need help on. So for example, we've got an example there of someone looking for a procurement template for a nature-based solution scheme, or perhaps you have something to share. Maybe it's an impact document or a report or a bit of learning you've produced at your own organization. You could also add that there. So that's all from me. I'll just share some of the results from the first poll. Hopefully you can see this in a moment. Just loading. I can't now see you, so I hope that's there, Emma.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, as we can see, so lots of people coming from local authorities and other, actually. So I'll have a look at the results and see what those kind of groups are. What type of nature-based solutions do you support the delivery of? Lots of a range of different things: peatland restoration, education, SUDS, green infrastructure, a whole list of stuff there, which is really, really exciting. What are the biggest challenges that people face to scaling nature-based solutions? Funding at the top, which is good because that's what we'll talk about today. Lots of things on resources, buy-in and knowledge. So that's really, really interesting to see. And who do you need to influence to have greater impact in your role? So local authorities, government, local commissioners, partnerships, planners, all of that. So all really interesting to see. And we'll use this to plan the scope of future sessions as well. Thank you, Emma. Back to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Matt. And do please, if you're interested in that mentoring program, we'll be sharing links to apply to either be a mentor, so to be paid to offer your expertise and skills to others in the region, or a mentee if you'd like to access support from others. We found that these peer mentoring schemes can be incredibly effective in terms of sharing learning and really helping to kind of kickstart new initiatives across the region. Now, next, I'm delighted to welcome Andy Wright, who's Director of the Lund Trust, who are very generously funding this programme of work. And they previously funded Ashden's Nature-Based Solutions Award, which is part of the annual Ashden Awards that Matt mentioned earlier. And that's how we found some of the great projects and initiatives that we'll be sharing learning from through this programme of work. So I'm just going to hand over to Andy now, just to say a few words.
Thank you, Emma. And hello and welcome everyone. From where I'm sitting today, I can see the London plane trees that were planted along the then brand new Victoria embankment in around 1870. The new embankment narrowed the River Thames and created a new raised walkway along it. On the opposite bank, you can see the Festival Hall and the National Theatre, and further along, Shakespeare's Globe. It was an engineering solution, housing the new sewers, which were designed to combat the Great Stink, because the Thames in the mid-19th century was an open sewer, heavily polluted with human and industrial waste. And people believed diseases such as cholera and others were spread by the overwhelming smell from the river. The new sewer system mostly solved that particular problem. The diseases afflicting London's population were actually all waterborne. But the trees were intended as a significant part of the solution to remove particles from the air, to block the stench that people thought was spreading disease. We may think of nature-based solutions as something new or something that belongs to less urban, less densely populated places, but they were part of the Victorians' approach to the major crisis of their day, which was public health in cities. And it turns out the London plane trees were a great choice, not so much then, but now. Forest researchers' report on the ecosystem services delivered by large stature urban trees shows that London planes are among the most effective for carbon storage and sequestration, and that they are the most effective at helping to avoid runoff from storms and removing pollution from the air. The climate crisis is the major crisis of our day, and this more than a century-old nature-based solution still plays a part in its mitigation. Lund's Trust supports a range of work on pollution and rivers and greening towns and cities, because our vision is a united kingdom where people and nature thrive together. To get to the point of thriving requires our best science and better policy, but most importantly means people working with nature. We know that spending time in nature provides mental health and physical health benefits. We also know that by working with nature, we can mitigate climate change and its effects, whether that means reducing flooding or heat, or increasing biodiversity and creating new infrastructure and jobs that reduce pollution and other harms. So we're really pleased to support Ashden, because another key part of Lund Trust's approach is to support work that inspires people by sharing skills, ideas and knowledge, as you're all going to do today and planning to do in future. And this work is urgent. In the Northwest, we can see the impacts of the climate and nature crises, such as more frequent and intensive storms across Merseyside and a 40% drop in individual bird species in Manchester since 1985. Nature-based solutions offer the Northwest the opportunity to tackle the climate crisis, whilst providing loads of other benefits, like improved health outcomes and job opportunities for residents. This is also a great opportunity to bring communities with us to create even greater impacts as we work with nature to tackle the climate crisis together. And this meeting is just one of the many ways we can start to work together on this. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Ashden for running this.
Thanks so much, Andy. Yes, so we're here to talk about nature-based solutions to the changing climate. And just to stop for a moment, pause for a moment and think about what that changing climate is going to look like. So in the northwest of England, we are forecast to have temperatures that might be increasing by as much as 2.6 degrees by the 2050s, and more extreme weather events, so that by the 2070s, deluges of more than 20 millimetres in a very short space of time will be 4 times more likely than they are now. And nature can play a tremendously important role in mitigating the risks of these impacts. So I'm delighted now to start introducing our expert speakers who are going to join us to talk about their knowledge and expertise in this area, focusing on how you can fund work in this area, which is always a thorny issue, as we saw in that poll, and also really where to start. What are the no regrets actions that people should be looking at? And first up, we've got Daveen Wallis, who's Director of Nature and Wellbeing at the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. And we're very grateful to Daveen because she was one of the people that we spoke to when we were looking at setting up this network. We picked her brains for some knowledge and ideas. Daveen's got 26 years of experience at Lancashire Wildlife Trust under her belt. And in that time, she's overseen the distribution of funding to community groups through their Green Spaces Fund and has been involved with the Greater Manchester Environment Fund. Daveen's going to give us some of her tips and tricks on funding and how to get nature-based solution projects underway. Over to you, Daveen.
Great, thank you, Emma. I'll just share my slides, so just bear with me. Okay, is that all shared?
Perfect. Thanks, Daveen.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me to present. And yeah, it's a subject that I could very easily cover the whole workshop on, but so hopefully I can squeeze what I can into 12 minutes. And as Emma had introduced, I've got 26 years experience of supporting groups, organisations, partners to look at how we can fund some amazing nature-based solution projects that have been delivered over the last many years. I've also set up the Greater Manchester Environment Fund, and alongside that we've developed criteria to make sure that it's easy and simple for groups to be able to apply, and also from a funder's point of view, it's easy to find those projects that are the best value for money and will deliver the best impact for us. So it's with that experience that I hope I can give some top tips over the next 10 minutes. So just to say there are different types of funding that's available Obviously, there's the traditional grants that many people apply to, but there's also other ways to secure funding through individual giving, where you might do a sponsored run or a cake sale, or it's something very individual to you and a personal challenge. Or you might look at crowdfunding, which again, over a short period of time to reach a particular target. And that's often good for getting individual support, but also corporate support. And there's various crowdfunding platforms that are available. But also corporates are becoming a bigger way in which we can secure funding for important projects. So there's a lot of corporates that are out there that would like to give that kind of support. So when we're looking for funding applications, it's good to sign up to local CVSs, and they have a regular newsletter. Local authorities sometimes give advice, so depending on where you are, some local authorities have a regular news or website where they give advice. There's various local networks and partnerships that again do give some very targeted advice. An example here is the Next Door Nature Hub, which is a community which has a lot of community resources on it, including how to secure funding for your project. But there's other websites and other networks that it's good to sign up to. When you're looking at making a pitch, so some funders just ask you to write a 2-page document, or particularly with a corporate, they might want something very concise that you provide, that we call a pitch. It's good to think of that in terms of the need that you're trying to address, how you're going to deliver to achieve what you need to against that need, and then what impact that you're going to make. So try and think of it as 3 stages in that way. Make sure you're responding to the funding criteria. That is absolutely critical. A lot of people might miss maybe replicating some of the words that a funder wants to see. So just make sure that you are meeting the criteria, and keep to word counts. Try and be as concise as you can, and try to avoid using any jargon. Be passionate and aspirational, but also make sure that you're being realistic and achievable. So where you can, make sure that it's very clear how you're delivering to achieve the targets and the impact that you say that you will do. Obviously, track record is something that funders like to see, and they will be looking at value for money. A lot of funders will be wanting to see that you've done your planning, that you've done your consultation, and you know what your baseline data is. So make sure that you've done that bit of research into that. So just thinking about research, it's critical for a funder to want to see what your impact is. Make sure that you're addressing the need that has been identified, and wanting to know that this is the best solution to tackle the problem that you've identified. So it's good to be able to talk around that, and to be able to demonstrate directly how you are addressing a need. So it's critical that you kind of think about where you might be looking for data that backs up a particular problem. It's good to reference that and make sure that it's clear that this is a real need, and that this is an issue that you can address. Around consultation, it's something that a lot of funders like to see, that particularly if you've got a project that's going to be benefiting people, they want to see that you have actually consulted with those people that you will be benefiting. So if there's any way to carry out consultation, that's really important. It could just be a meeting that you hold, but through a meeting you might not have so many people giving you quantitative data, but a lot of people can give you stories, and you can take quotes from those kind of meetings, and the quotes are really important for a lot of funders to see the personal stories and the personal benefits that some of the projects that you're putting together will actually have a direct impact on the people that are going to feel it the most. Think about if there could be a way to strengthen your bid through potentially joining up with other people, because there's often strength in partnerships as well. So just a few top tips that I've just pulled together. Do check eligibility. There are organisations and groups that fail at the first hurdle. So please do check that you are eligible. If you have applied in the past, make sure that you have waited a certain amount of time if the funder stipulates that. Always go and look at the funders' websites and look at what they have funded in the past. And you can also access their annual accounts through the Charity Commission to actually see who they have funded before, because it's good to see what kind of project they're interested in. A lot of funders have very wide-ranging criteria, but if you look at what they've funded over the last few years, that's really a good indicator to know if your project is the right fit. We've covered research. It's good to have a bid buddy, someone that can share applications so you can see what other people are putting into funding applications, but also having a critical friend, someone that's happy to use their red pen and to provide some very constructive feedback, because that is the best way to learn and the best way to put in a good funding bid. Make sure that if it's an online application, you create your application in a Word document first. And a lot of funders do tend to score applications. So try to read back over your application and against the funding criteria, try to score your application to check that you're hitting all of the criteria that they're being asked for, and make it as easy as possible for that person that's reading your application to see how you are hitting the criteria. So if you use headings or use some bolded text, it helps to stand out some of the key areas that you're putting across. The final thing is make sure you've got all the permissions in place. Particularly landowner permission is a lot of what funders will be looking for, to see that you can hit the ground running as soon as you get offered the money. If you need planning permission, that's another criteria that a lot of funders tend to look for. And quotes is something that helps a funder to see that you've been realistic about the costs that you've put into an application. So just as an example, this is from the Green Spaces Fund that we manage through the Greater Manchester Environment Fund. We actually have this scoring criteria in our guidance notes. So it's very clear how we're going to be scoring an application and how we've weighted that score. So please do look out for anything like that helps you to write an application. So thinking about some easy wins if you're starting out and you've not had much experience of funding, try to start off with a small application and then you can start building your track record. Apply for funding that has previously funded something similar and you know you're going to have a good chance of getting the money. Have that clear need and that direct impact. Partner up with someone else who's applying. It's that strength in having that strong partnership, particularly with someone that's got that track record. And make sure you've got that evidence of need that helps to really demonstrate the support from the local community. Please do go and get advice and support where you can. Make sure that you're using those experts out there. And again, if they're happy to be named in your application, that again adds a bit of weight to why your project is important. Relationship building is critical, particularly as you're looking at longer term funding. So getting to know your funders that are local to your local businesses and people in your community really does help to make sure that we can continue bringing in funding for important projects. So please make sure that you are building in those relationships. And just finally, these are my 3 key takeaways. Get to know your local community, your local businesses, find those warm leads, those willing partners, because it's strength in numbers to look at collaboration to hit those biggest targets that we need for nature. Make sure you're properly planned and you've got all your permissions in place so funders can easily see that your project is ready to go. It has minimum risk for you to be able to deliver it. And really know your needs and be able to demonstrate how your impact is helping to address that need. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daveen, and for being absolutely spot on time. Some
Oh,
brilliant tips there, and great to hear you talking so much about the possibility of partnership working. And I can see people already connecting through the chat, which is brilliant. So maybe some partnerships for funding bids can be born out of this network, and the Padlet exercise later should help support that as well. Just a reminder, do please put any questions for Daveen in the chat. You can also join a breakout with her later, but feel free to ask questions as we go along. And I will also share a link. So Daveen's organisation has delivered some amazing nature-based solutions projects. So things like extending sand dunes to offer soft flood defences, creating wetlands out of previous agricultural farmland to reduce flood risk and boost biodiversity. So they're an absolute powerhouse of nature-based solutions delivery. So there's lots of inspiration for you on that website. And I'll share a link, or Daveen, if you want to share a link to that in the chat, that would be great. Okay, so moving on to our next speaker. So Friends of Gledhow Valley Woods, which is near Leeds, they nurture a precious urban space working closely with a diverse group of local people. Their work lowers flood risks and boosts biodiversity while bringing residents closer to nature. And they were a finalist in our Ashden Awards last year under that Nature-Based Solutions Award that the Lund Trust funded. So David's going to talk to us a little bit about the success they've had in leveraging and funding from a range of sources beyond grants, including a partnership with an engineering firm, Sweco, I think that's how it's pronounced. And he's going to share with us what he's learned about navigating the funding landscape. So over to you, David.
Hi, good morning, everyone. From Yorkshire. It's not very warm, but it's most of the time it's pretty sunny. That was a great some great stuff coming there from Daveen, and I'm hoping that I can zoom in a little bit more to talk about some of the things that she was talking about in a very small local sort of charity, what we're doing in Leeds. And I think somebody's going to do the slides for me if I ask. Thank you very much. We're a very small charity, as I say, conserving a small piece of woodland which runs for 1.5 kilometres along a major sort of road in North Leeds. We have no paid staff at all. All our work is done by volunteers, and most of our work is done at a monthly session where we have 40 plus sort of volunteers coming along. Despite having no staff, in the last few years, we've managed to raise 300k sort of funding for nature-based sort of solutions. And we've got a whole range of other programs that we're looking at. So we're clearly on target to get to around £500,000 of sort of funding for our next project, which is around woodland sort of management. So we've been fairly successful in sort of raising money, and we undertake quite a wide range of conservation community activities. In our work, we work with local schools, refugees and asylum seekers, youth groups, as well as corporate sort of groups. We were established in 1996. We don't own the land that we sort of care for. It's owned by the local authority and Wade's charity, which is a very venerable Leeds charity that was set up in the time of Henry VIII in 1530. So it's been going for a long time. Next slide, please. So just in terms of some of the local sort of challenges that we sort of face, the Gledhow Valley Road dissects the sort of woods, which is a sort of major challenge to us. We have poor active travel infrastructure, poor air and water quality, examples of sort of fly tipping around, and obviously we're feeling the impact of sort of climate change. Next slide, please. Just in terms of some of the local solutions, we've managed to create a whole range of ponds and wetland sort of areas, linking fragmented wildlife communities, improving sort of habitat for people. We've restored Gledhow Lake, which was a medieval sort of lake, using nature-based solutions. We've installed leaky dams to stop capture silt and reducing sort of pollution in the area. We've installed fascines on the very steep valley sides and planted up the sort of area, working with a local coppice workers sort of group. And we've also produced sort of better management of existing sort of wetlands by removing sort of trees and sort of planting the sort of area. So all of that is helped to improve the area for nature. Next slide, please. So just some of the other work we've been doing. We work with lots of local sort of schools, and in the last few years we've planted 3 kilometres of hedgerow along the sort of valley, involving local kids. Really love that kind of work. The second slide there of the trees in the road is to illustrate the closure that we managed to get underway of Gledhow Valley Road last July, and we're repeating the experience this year, where we closed a major road for the day, obviously with local authority sort of permission, to highlight environmental concerns in the area, give people a chance to experience the woods without any sort of pollution and noise from sort of traffic, and safely. And we had 3,000 plus people come to that event. It was a magical day, really inspiring for sort of people, and we had no complaints about the closure of a major road for the day. So it was a major achievement for us. Lots of support from sort of local councillors. I would strongly advise that people get involved with their local councillors, talk to them about what you're trying to do, involve them throughout the sort of process. It's an interesting experience because at the same time, locally, there was a lot of concern about creating traffic-free neighbourhoods, a lot of local opposition to that. Yet the way we managed to close the road for the day, we had no opposition to that, full support from our highways department. So it's about how you go about things, and you can go about things in such a way that it does sort of you do get success, you do achieve what you're wanting to do. The other picture I wanted to highlight there was our citizen science project on the bottom right there. We do a whole range of monitoring of water quality in the Gledhow sort of valley. The beck is pretty poor in terms of water quality, so we're trying to lobby for improvements to that. And we've recruited 32 citizen science volunteers who monitor the water on a monthly basis. We started that project off with £500 of money from a local initiative, which you may have in your area, called ACTS, which is a a collaboration between universities and local community groups. And from that £500, because of our involvement with that and the work we've done, we've now signed up to a £1 million collaboration with Leeds and York universities, where throughout Yorkshire, citizen science groups are monitoring water quality and lobbying for sort of improvements to water quality. So it's a great example of where a small local group can sort of move from a very small project to getting involved across the whole sort of region. And it's not just about the money, it's also about the information and the contacts that gives you with Yorkshire Water, politicians, the Environment Agency, a whole range of sort of agencies. So from one very small local initiative, a huge project has developed, and that's going to run for the next 4 years. It's funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, and is a great sort of local initiative that we're involved in. Next slide, please. Okay, so just something in terms of how we funded our work. I've mentioned already collaboration with universities. Water at Leeds University provide advice and funding and other support for us. And also, interestingly, we've made contacts with Leeds Business School at Leeds University, who are advising us around policy engagement. We all know there's a massive issue of water quality, and it's only by engagement with sort of politicians and other key decision makers that things will sort of change. So they're advising us on how we might sort of go about that, using a report that we're just in the process of producing on the state of the beck and lake in the sort of valley, and then work out from there to begin that process of bringing about sort of change. It's already been mentioned our partnership with Sweco. They're an international company that just happened to be based on our sort of doorstep, and they've been amazingly supportive. Dr. Karen Dunton there, who's a principal hydrologist, has provided lots of ideas and support around nature-based solutions, which has been sort of great to sort of have. She's also advising us on deculverting parts of Gledhow Beck, which, you know, is invaluable sort of information which a small local group would not be able to access sort of otherwise. So that's a very important link. We also have excellent relationships with the Leeds City Council. Everybody's aware, obviously, that councils are under tremendous pressure in terms of sort of funding, but they've supported us greatly in kind, you know, in terms of sort of advice that we've required. Also, some funders require local authorities to be the lead sort of partner. So although we might write a funding application, Leeds City Council, Parks and Countryside have been very good at taking the lead in submitting that application, and also doing all the funding stuff that you have to do, inevitably reporting to sort of funders afterwards. So that's a very good link and can help small local charities as well. We also work closely with Groundwork Yorkshire. Again, lots of advice and support from them. They also project manage all the work that we sort of undertake, which certainly takes pressure off a small local group. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of funding for our work, we've done a range of things, very much the same kind of things that Daveen was talking about, looking at. We did a crowdfunding to purchase a field that was at risk of being sort of developed a few years ago now. And crowdfunding was amazing. Within 3 weeks, we managed to raise the £36,000 that was required to purchase the land. So I'd strongly suggest that people look at sort of crowdfunding, a combination of crowdfunding and obviously social media pressure. We've used the National Lottery and the postcode lottery for restoration of Gledhow Lake. Landfill operators are very good sort of funders, large amounts of money if you're looking for it. We've just had £70,000 from Veolia as part of our restoration of Gledhow Beck. Local authorities, has been mentioned sort of previously, can be very good. We have the West Yorkshire Mayor Fund for climate change, which we've used extensively. And I put down there about our relationship with Wage Charity, which I've already mentioned. They're very good at funding the boring stuff for us. A lot of funders won't want to fund some of the initial work that you have to do on a large scale sort of project. So the stuff about getting contracts in place, doing the drawings, doing the design work, the contract management, all of that kind of stuff. Wage Charity have been very good with us in terms of funding that work on a continual sort of basis. We're also exploring the use of biodiversity net gain, again with SWECO. We've just undertaken a wetland sort of project, and because we had an ecologist along from SWECO, completely sort of free to us, they were able to show from their initial sort of baseline survey they did that we'd had a 76% increase in biodiversity on the piece of land where the work was done. So in terms of sort of charities and funders, they're very keen to see sort of results, and to be able to prove that you have that kind of impact on a area of land, it's very powerful sort of stuff. So I strongly suggest that if you do have local businesses who might want to get involved, you do talk to them. I've talked about supporting kind already. So next slide, please. So just some of the stuff that again Daveen was sort of saying. Make sure you're trained and plugged into funding sort of networks. Be very credible and realistic in what you're doing. You need to tell a compelling story in terms of what you're trying to do, but also be being realistic about it. Seek out and cherish great partners. I can't emphasize enough how important partners are, and establishing long-term partnerships with other groups who have similar aims to you. Work together. There's strength in numbers. That's really important. Get an independent review of all your applications before you submit them. Voluntary organisation, voluntary action, in our case voluntary action leads is very good. They have a service where they'll look at your application and advise you on it. That's quite important. Understand your potential funders and what they might need and what their requirements are. Keep funders informed and engaged and acknowledged at all times. Read the small print in applications. Don't get caught out. Make sure you get it right first time. Make sure you've got good governance in place for yourself, policies and procedures in place, all that background information. And key to all, I guess, is make sure you're ambitious for your green space. You know what you want. Be ambitious for your green space and go get it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Really inspirational stuff there. And a common theme coming out of your presentation and Daveen's is around partnerships and the potential role of partnerships in accessing and securing funding. So to support with that, if you haven't already, if you'd be able to change your name as it appears on Zoom to include your organisation. So it's quite easy to do on Zoom. You right click on your name or the 3 dots in the corner of your tile and just add in your organisation name, and then you can have a little look to see who else is on the call and whether there's anybody you might be interested in approaching. And also to support with that, we've got an exercise on a collaborative tool called Padlet, which we'll share a link to in a moment, which is really where you can add details. If you want to share your contact details with others on this call, if you want to be open for approaches about potential partnerships, and if you want to share some information on what you're doing at the moment, do please add some details to that site. We've got an exercise at the end of the workshop just before midday where we'll do that collaboratively. But I know always with some of these events, some people have to go after the first hour. If you don't have to go, do please stay with us. We've got 2 more fantastic presentations coming up. We're going to hear after a very short break from Riverlution, which has got an incredible business model where they get businesses that are in flood risk zones to actually fund some of their nature-based solutions work. And then we're going to hear from Finance Earth about some of the funding options and the funding models that they've developed for public-private charitable sector organisations. But we're going to have a quick comfort break before we go to our next presentation. So if you want to go and grab a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and come back at 10:55, please be back at 10:55 for the next presentation. If you do have to go, please only go if you absolutely have to. Do have click on that link and add some details either now or you can do it later. That link will stay open, but we just didn't want you to go without accessing that link. So we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, hope that was enough time to grab a drink if you wanted one. We'll kick off now with our next speaker. So I'm delighted to welcome Geoff Guy, who is Managing Director of Riverlution. They were one of Ashden's shortlisted award winners last year, and they are a community interest company operating in Sheffield and Hull, and they've built a unique business partnership model where local businesses that are in flood risk zones part finance Riverlution's urban nature-based interventions. And Geoff's also going to provide some insights on how to incorporate social impacts of nature-based solutions throughout a project. So over to you, Geoff. On mute. We can see
there we go.
Beautifully.
Sorry.
One full slide and then we're good to go.
Okay. Everyone hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Brilliant. So thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about Riverlution. I'm going to try and cover a few key topics. Firstly, what is the Stewardship Partnership? So that kind of model of involving businesses in some of our urban management strategies for rivers, we put under the sort of title of Stewardship Partnership because it partners Riverlution, our parent company, River Stewardship Company, local businesses, local authority, and others in taking some positive action for the river and those areas that are threatened by flooding, but also threatened by general sort of ecological and environmental decline as well. I'll tell you a bit about why it matters. And for us, from a funding point of view, that is often the big item, because why it matters and the impact it has influences whether or not we get the funding that we require. Telling that story and how we measure it and prove that it is impactful to businesses is a really important part of what we do. That will feed into how it's funded and what it offers to partners. You know, as a partnership model that involves businesses, there has to be a benefit to them. And yes, for some organisations, the fact that there is a positive kind of flood risk reduction or environmental improvement is enough, but there sometimes needs to be other things that we can provide for them as well. So I'll tell you a bit about that and plans for expanding this further. So our Stewardship Partnership, now we have one operating in Sheffield that's been there for over 2 years now and has proven to be very effective. And that's where the model was kind of proven. But it's a partnership between businesses, local authorities, Environment Agency and community groups, but also sort of individuals within the community that might access training opportunities and volunteer opportunities through us as part of this partnership. Delivers a long-term sustainable program of non-technical, and that's quite key. You know, we work a lot with like I said, community groups, people that are trying to enter the green skills sector as a career choice or move into it from another career. And so most of the work is is relatively non-technical. It's the kind of work that can be done with elbow grease and hand tools, rather than, you know, civil engineering sort of heavy duty work. A really key part, and this is what really feeds into the social impact side of what we do, is the idea that these partnerships also provide training opportunities, education, career progression opportunities for the people that it involves. I think I'd go out on a limb and say that education is the most socially impact. I don't think it's really much of a limb. I think it's pretty obvious to most people. Education has got to be the most socially impactful thing that there is, and we also need to recognise that green skills, environmental careers, as the whole of the land-based industry, it's an aging demographic, so routes into the industry for young people to be involved in this sort of thing is a really important part of what we do as well. And the reason this kind of partnership matters is because of scenes like this. This was Sheffield in 2007. It was mentioned that we're working in Hull and the Humber area now. There are similar pictures from that sort of area of the same year, the same flood event. And this particular flood event prompted the creation of Riverlution's parent company, the River Stewardship Company, back in 2008, to carry out sort of little and often regular maintenance on the rivers of Sheffield, and to tackle issues like this, issues that if left unaddressed can exacerbate the kind of flooding that you saw in the previous picture, and which will, yes, cause flooding or make flood events worse. But they're issues that are relatively non-technical. With regular maintenance, this kind of thing is relatively easy to deal with, and if handled sensitively, can be an environmental benefit as well. You know, healthily coppiced riverbank vegetation is better for wildlife than, you know, trees that are all the same age and then are going to cause a problem going forward. And this is sort of the impact of this partnership. Then, if the partnership that operates in Sheffield, just in the first 3 quarters of this current financial year, they carried out management of over 310,000 square meters of riverbank for invasive species. That's primarily dealing with Himalayan balsam. And the beauty of these partnerships is that it will tackle work that would often be overlooked by work that might have more obvious funding streams. So there are funding streams for the control of things like Japanese knotweed and giant hogweed, but there is much more limited funding opportunities for things like Himalayan balsam, which is no less necessarily of a flood risk, but is harder to find funding for. So it's been able to kind of fill that gap. Also, in the last 3 quarters, or the first 3 quarters of this financial year, the team's taken over 80 tons of litter and debris out of the rivers. And like I said, these are non-technical solutions. So this isn't cranes and stuff. These are groups of volunteers or a small team of apprentices with elbow grease and ropes and rubble sacks getting things out of the river. And this then allows us to engage with a lot of volunteers from businesses that we work with as funders, but also from community groups. And this then allows us to tackle all these 3 key these key areas relating to flood risk and providing training, and all of them that then feeds in to generating a social impact for the area, which is what potential business funders are often interested in. One of the things that generates the most of that social impact is the fact that these training partnerships these stewardship partnerships, incorporate accredited training for apprentices, for volunteers, and for trainees that work with the partnership. They gain qualifications that will help them into perhaps their first job in the green skills sector. So they can gain things like accredited first aid training, they can gain chainsaw certificates, brush cutter certificates, things that are going to help them with that first job. And they get to take part in activities all the way from the very top of the catchment up in the Peak District, down through the urban areas of Sheffield. They get to learn about how water runs across farmland and catchment sensitive farming, and participate in a whole range of activities. Another thing that's particularly socially impactful is the fact that some of these will then go on to be employed not only with us and our parent company, but potentially in other roles in the industry as well. And it is funded by a partnership of businesses. And so for our Sheffield and Humber partnerships at the moment, we've got a sort of patchwork of funding from local authority, an environment agency, and our own parent company, which injects funding into it. But then businesses that either are riparian businesses and situated on the riverbanks within those flood risk areas, or perhaps that have a more kind of altruistic idea that they're going to be, they might not have a flood risk on their property or at their business, but they might want to have a positive impact for people entering the sector, or they might want to be involved in generating some of those natural flood management solutions or other things that they can then partner with us to fund and produce. What they also then do is they're able to send their staff out to volunteer with us safely, because that is a question for some of them. They want to send people out to do environmental volunteering, but you can't chuck 24 people that are more used to an office environment in a river and just hope for the best. They need waders, they need life jackets, they need someone that's going to rescue them if they float off down the river towards Doncaster. And that is something we can then provide those businesses, and then they become partners with us in providing that solution, and get involved with things like this. The benefits then for them is they're part of that community, that partnership that is carrying out those positive actions on the rivers. They get volunteer days, and this is part of the funding model, but part of the sell to businesses then, that they get these benefits. It's positive for them in terms of their public appearance and local recognition. It's a sustainable funding model, and for us that's really important. We didn't want to be entirely reliant on one source of funding, whether that was grants, whether that was sponsorship, whether that was kind of statutory bodies that were able to provide some funding. For us as a community interest company, being able to provide these solutions over an extended period of time, this kind of takes some of the risk out of it. Yes, economic factors might mean that there will be churn in those businesses that will support in a given year, but it gives us multiple strands to allow this to continue, hopefully forever, because it is something that needs doing. That the work is ongoing work. And then it also proves their commitment to social impact. So for those that might need to be involved in procurement processes through local authorities where there is a requirement that they evidence social impact, this is a kind of vehicle for them to do that as well. And then we use the social value engine, which ties into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to track and sort of audit in detail the social impact of these schemes, which is one of the big things that convinces businesses that this is a good investment for them and a good partnership for them to be involved with. And like I said at the beginning, the next steps is to replicate this model that's proven effective in Sheffield elsewhere. We introduced a team in the Humber region last month who are now active. They're planting trees in South Ferriby today, and they're active in the region already. And further to that, increasing the amount of training we can deliver through these partnerships. So that's helping people move into the sector and take those first steps into a green career. More partnerships. Yeah, I think my team think I'm joking when I say every river system in the country, but I'm really not. I think this is a partnership that could be relevant just about anywhere, either through expanding our current partnerships or introducing new ones on other river systems. So yeah, that is it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jeff. I've now got a very vivid image in my head of my Ashden colleagues being chucked in a river, and I think something to suggest for our next away day. But really inspiring stuff, and I think absolutely that being kind of literate, being savvy with social value, that is going to be a really critical way going forward of securing funding. So I don't know if that engine that you shared, I don't know whether that's something that anybody can access. Maybe we could just share a link to that. I've not come across that one before. But
I can share a link. Yeah.
Great for people to check that out. Thank you so much. And then moving on to our final speaker of the morning, I'm delighted to welcome Richard Speake, who is co-founder of Finance Earth, which is a social enterprise working with public, private and charitable sector organisations to design high-impact investable projects that work on the ground, not just in theory. And they've worked with local authorities across the country on over 100 projects, really looking at trying to develop new models for financing nature-based solutions. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks very much, Emma. Morning, everyone. Lovely to be here to talk to you. So you've heard from Daveen and David, and they've been talking about grant funding and the funding that's available. Jeff's talked about partnering with businesses and getting revenue in to deliver that. I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum, which is about repayable finance or investment. And why is that important? Well, if we want to try and prevent species decline globally, we need about $700 billion a year. If we bring that down to a UK spectrum, it's about £6 billion a year over and above the existing funding that's coming from philanthropy and coming from the public sector. And so there simply isn't enough philanthropic and public sector money to kind of cover that gap. So we need to drag in the private sector. And the way to do that is to find some revenue models and to find some repayable finance models that can work. And the theory of change around that is if we can find these repayable models and we can free up that scarce philanthropic resource, that public sector financing, to do some really deeply impactful stuff that people just wouldn't be able to invest in. So we exist as a social enterprise to try and bring these models to the market and to try and make these nature projects or climate projects investable to the mainstream investors. So I'll talk today a little bit about who we are, what we've done. I'll deep dive into a couple of projects for you to give you some examples, and then I'll talk a little bit about the sorts of hints and tips when you're looking for investment as a tool in the toolkit. You know, what does your project need to look like? So as I said, we're a social enterprise, so we've got a mission to try and remove that financing gap for nature. So far, we've managed to do over 100 projects, and we've mobilised over 100 million for nature and climate, which, whilst we're very proud of, is a long way from the 700 billion required, which feels like a big number. But if you look at Wall Street, it's about the annual budget that they pay in banker bonuses every year. So in theory, it's definitely doable. So we work with charities, NGOs, public sector organisations, both local authorities and central governments, and corporates and investors, really trying to bring repayable finance into the market as a tool in the toolkit. And we do that in two ways. We work in what we call advisory, which is where we get our hands dirty trying to bring these projects together on the ground. So working through what a revenue model might be, what the business model might be, what the capital stack needs to be. So how do you blend that grant finance with that business support, with the crowdfunding and some investment? And then we try and execute those projects and bring in all of those funders to make that project happen. But those projects tend to be single projects, they tend to be quite small, and the investors of the world tend not to get out of bed for those sorts of projects at scale. So how do we then scale, aggregate, replicate those projects and create investment product that the bigger investors, the institutional investors, the pension funds, the insurance companies, where all of our money is kind of held for our retirement? How do we connect those into those projects on the ground? So we create investment products and funds that bring that together. I'll try and bring that to life in a minute with a couple of examples. And I guess the
Wait,
third...
Sorry to interrupt, your sound's breaking up a little bit. I don't know whether it might be worth turning off your... Well, yeah, lean in, and then maybe if we're having problems, you could turn off your camera and we just look at the slides. But yeah, keep going. I'll let you know if it continues to be a problem. Thanks.
Great. Sorry about that. Yeah, and so the third element of our business is market building, where we've been trying to bring through a number of these models into kind of government and help government work out how they scale private investment across the UK and more broadly. Just a bit of a sense of activity, I guess, because I think it is important to say this isn't just a UK problem, this is global. And actually there's a lot of really good learning globally that can be brought back to the UK, and we do that. So we're active in over 35 countries. We work a lot in developing in the developing context as well as the developed context, trying to really work through how you can create sort of global solutions to executing nature-based projects across the world. So I said I'd bring it to life a little bit. So the investment advisory side of our business, this is I call it a blend of consulting and corporate finance. And what we do is we work with organizations on the ground to really try and execute nature-based solutions projects and make those investable for investors. So you'll see we've worked with the likes of the RSPB, the National Trust, a lot of the wildlife trusts, helping them work out how they use investment as a tool in the toolkit, building their capacity, their capability to use it on projects that they want to deliver. And so far, we've managed to do over 10 million of projects with those organizations, and there's a much, much bigger pipeline. We've then worked with local authorities. So we helped with the Greater Manchester Environment Fund. We actually did the Natural Capital Investment Strategy as a precursor to that, and then worked out how you could bring that together into a funding vehicle, an aggregation vehicle. And we've worked with a number of other local authorities across the country, helping them work out how they use investment to deliver their environmental strategies. And we work with corporates, which is really important, to try and drag the corporates into this space to pay for some of these outcomes. And become the revenue providers for some of these models. So we've worked with a lot of the land developers, a lot of banks, trying to help them work through that. We also do a lot in supply chains, and I mention this because it's increasingly important to the corporates. As Jeff was saying, how do you get these corporates interested in giving you money for these projects? And a lot of that is being driven by the regulation and the reporting that they have to do, whether it's through the TCFD on climate, whether it's TNFD on nature, whether it's just ESG and their sustainable corporate principles. But there's a lot of work that these corporates are doing on trying to make their supply chains better. And actually nature is a big part of that. And so how do we work with the likes of Mars, Cargill, the big supermarkets like Walmart, or in the UK, Tesco, Sainsbury's, working out how they can make their fisheries supply chain more sustainable? How do we bring finance into that to help deliver a lot of interventions to reduce overfishing, reduce kind of plastic in the environment? We've done a piece of work in the UK where organizations who are looking at net zero and have their scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, and I won't get into the technical detail of that, but broadly scope 1 and scope 2 is within their control, scope 3 is within their supply chain. They need to decarbonize that supply chain, but actually they don't have direct control over it, and often there's a lot of organizations who are also reporting the same emissions in that supply chain. How do they work together as organizations to try and help that supply chain decarbonize? And with Soil Association, we've worked through a model that's allowing the supermarkets to decarbonize the wheat farming supply chain by paying the farmers to put interventions into nature on their farms to help that decarbonization journey. And so they're all reporting the same kind of decarbonization. And then I mentioned about the funds and how we bring that together. So we develop investment product. So we did the first and largest community-owned renewable energy fund in the UK. That was designed to actually put these projects in the hands of the communities that are around them. So allowing those communities to be capacity built, to take on those solar farms, and then using the profits of those solar farms to invest in climate and nature in their local area. That's opposed to the sort of traditional funding model where the big investors kind of buy those solar farms and then their investors own them, and their investors tend to be Chinese pension funds and German family offices. So that profit is actually getting offshored rather than staying onshored. And so we look at those community models of how we can keep all of that benefit. We also run a nature-based solutions accelerator, probably relevant for the audience today. This is for near investment ready products. projects. So there's another program that the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, run called the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, which is a grant program that helps projects get investment ready. Some of those projects don't actually reach that point, and so we then take those projects and do that last mile work with them to get them ready to go into an investment product at the end of that. We also run the government's UK Nature Impact Fund. This was where DEFRA put 30 million of investment to work to try and do woodland creation, peatland restoration and biodiversity net gain. And we're currently fundraising for a £250 million fund to bring that investment into the market across the UK. Finally, we do a lot of market building. I won't go into a lot of the detail here, just to say that all of these reports are available on our website. But what we focus on is high quality, high integrity in our projects. So if you're looking at how you can build in principles, we've done a lot of work with the large NGOs in the UK to create some nature market principles, which are both for the supply side. So how do you build your project to be that high quality, high integrity project? But also how do you work with the buyers of potential revenues, carbon or biodiversity net gain, to make sure that they're not greenwashing? So checking how they're using those projects, how they're reporting on that, and making sure that your own brand reputation is protected. So I said I'd try and bring it to life, and these slides will be available after the meeting, I believe. So please don't worry about taking screenshots, because there's quite a lot of information on the slides that's coming. But David mentioned about habitat banking and how they've started to look at the land that they're protecting, and how they might be able to generate revenue. So we did the first habitat bank in England before biodiversity net gain was even a thing, where we were using mitigation payments from a local council that had been locked up in the local council for a long period of time. Actually, they take that money from developers who are destroying habitat and needed to create a habitat, in this case for a bird called Searle bunting, which is a highly endangered bird, I believe from Russia, but migrating to the UK. And so the developer cannot start their development until the mitigation payment had been made and the mitigation habitat had been created. And there wasn't a solution for that, because nobody was willing to take the risk of developing that habitat. And so with the RSPB, we looked at a model whereby they would borrow some money for the first time actually in their 100-year plus existence to effectively pay for the creation of that habitat. Upon creation of the habitat, then Tamebridge Council would pay its mitigation payments across, which it's receiving from the property developers. And that habitat was created on some farmland from a tenant farmer who was looking over time to exit and retire. And so there was a staged, effectively, purchase of that farmland created and lease payments in the meantime to the farmer. And so we brought all of that together. So that habitat bank was created. The RSPB are now being paid from effectively those mitigation payments to maintain that habitat bank over time. And the residual kind of surplus of those mitigation payments is now paying back that loan. So that habitat bank was created without using any philanthropic funding. It used a public sector revenue stream effectively and private sector debt to allow that habitat to be created and then maintained, hopefully for the next kind of 30 years plus. We've then worked with a lot of local authorities about how they can use these sorts of models themselves. So one example is Plymouth. We've worked with Plymouth for the last 5 years on creating the Ocean City Nature strategy for Plymouth. And what that is it's a vehicle that Plymouth City Council are effectively the kind of governing body for. That vehicle, in the same way as the Greater Manchester Environment Fund is able to do, it aggregates a number of payments from donors, from the council itself, and it creates a pool of capital that it can then spend on both blue and green interventions across the city. What it then wants to do is create a number of effectively sub-funds or sub-vehicles that are then actively focused on a broader strategy of nature creation across the city, but on the individual themes that are required. So carbon or tree planting, biodiversity creation, marine protection, seagrass restoration, things like that. And so the first of those that we worked with Plymouth on was a biodiversity focused strategy, where Plymouth themselves have now created a habitat banking receiving the money from the developers directly, so the biodiversity net gain payments. They're also receiving internal biodiversity net gain payments from their own processors, and then they have strategically identified a number of habitat sites around their own land that they're already managing, whether that's through the parks and urban green space, or the land that sits around the city, which might currently be farmed and leased out to farmers. But they've looked at a number of sites that could be created as habitat banks, and they're now delivering the development of those habitat banks using a £500,000 loan. So again, they're not using their own funding. They've taken investment to be able to take that risk of developing the habitat bank. That habitat bank then creates a revenue stream over 30 years where it can sell the biodiversity net gain units to developers. In this case, the local authorities de-risked itself somewhat in that it is an off-taker of those units itself, but it will be selling to private developers as well. And that's enabled it to effectively not just improve those nature sites that it's already the custodian of, but also pay for the 30 years of maintenance. So it's taken a lot of risk out of its own funding requirements for those sites. So if you're looking at investment, here from our perspective, there's a few things to bear in mind. So first thing to say is that repayable finance investment doesn't work everywhere. So it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of your project needs. There has to be a revenue stream, or there has to be some kind of cash flow that will repay that investment. And so not every project can deliver that cash flow, and not every project is therefore suitable for investment. And that's really important to think about. But if we can get it investable, then there's a number of areas at the moment across ecosystem services in the UK that people are developing these projects. And I've defined here five different kind of stages. So capital investment at the end is the most developed. That's effectively investable. That's happening at scale across the UK. Pathfinder funding is where people are starting to do transactions, and we're seeing these starting to grow. Investment readiness is, like I said before, it's where people are starting to get these projects ready for investment, but there isn't really a big track record of investors coming into them. But there is a lot of funding available from people like DEFRA on the NEIRF program, or the Landscape Recovery program, focused on trying to bring that private capital in. There's then the monetization, which is where people are trying to prove those revenue streams exist and work with businesses to actually sell their ecosystem services. And there's the technical proving, which is where people are still using grant and public sector funding to work out whether these ecosystem services can even deliver a revenue. So where are we in the UK right now? So very early stage, things like blue carbon, very difficult to get investors into. Salt marsh restoration, so there is a salt marsh code under development for carbon that will be coming down the path, and that will make it much easier. And natural flood management has proven quite difficult to move into an investable model. There's a smattering of projects that have done that, but most of it is still grant funded or public sector funded. You know, the Environment Agency hasn't got its head around the kind of outcomes payments models or creating the revenue streams. Still very much focused on capital grants, which means that a lot of those projects.
Just to say, we're almost out of time. One more minute.
Yep. Okay, I will speed up. Also, so the monetization side, so things like soil carbon, water storage, voluntary biodiversity. So if you're working on those, people are just starting to prove the revenue side. But the things that are starting to become investable, so peatland restoration in the lowlands, nutrient extraction or balancing, and then the things that are definitely getting to the investment, so biodiversity net gain, upland peatland restoration, afforestation, and ecotourism. So if you're in those kind of latter stages of your projects, then they are suitable for investment. Earlier stages, not so much. In terms of developing the project out, you know, the key stages: understand what you're doing, understand the supply, understand what you're able to generate as revenues. What's the demand for those revenues? So working with the corporates, finding the buyers for those environmental services or the social outcomes that you're delivering. What are the options for how you deliver that, and how do you create kind of the capital stack? If you can get the grant funding in, we would always recommend that, but quite often there's a gap, and that's where the investment case comes in. So how do you create the investment case? And underpinning that, you know, is a financial model. It's very important to have a financial model. All investors will ask for that. And then getting towards the transaction, and the transaction means, unfortunately, lots of lawyers and lots of legals involved, but that's often quite useful to get paid for by things like the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund and some of the grant support that's out there. There are organisations like ourselves that help with all of this. Again, like I say, the slides will be available after the meeting. And thank you very much for your time today.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a useful discussion in your group. We've just got a few minutes left, but please do stay with us. We'd love to get your input on a final poll. And just before we go to a quick bit of feedback from each of those breakout groups, we're going to go back to the Padlet board where a lot of people have already shared some information. Matt, if you're able to just share the link again in the chat. If you haven't already, and even if you have, please take a look at that site because we've got some really interesting things being shared there. And the idea is you can read through those, see if there's anything that's of interest, other people you'd like to get in touch with. You can respond to particular threads with your own information. Where's that? Let me just pull that link out from earlier.
Oh, I've just shared it already, Emma, don't worry. The most recent thing in the chat.
Fantastic. Fantastic. It was just taking a while to show up in mine. So yeah, if you want to open that up, and you can just very easily click on a plus sign to add your own information. You can add pictures in if you want to, but you don't have to. Now, what I'm not sure is because we're quite new to using Padlet. I don't know if you saw the poor person earlier who was told he couldn't post because his name was inappropriate. Never come across that before. His surname is Leather. I can't really see what the issue with that is. I think if you want to make it very easy for people to get in touch with you, you can share your email in your post. We'll only be sharing this link with people who've signed up to these workshops. So it's the people who are here present on this call, but it will also be the other people. There are about another 50 people who'd signed up for this workshop and weren't able to make it. We basically screen out consultants. So it's open to public sector, third sector. It's also open to people, kind of key stakeholders like landowners in the area. But we don't let consultants join, so you won't be deluged by people trying to sell you stuff. But also you don't have to share your contact details. You can just post and then people can respond and you could connect up separately if you want to. So do take a look at that. And then we're going to leave that open. So if you want to add information, don't feel you have to do it before this call opens. You can add information at any time, but I would really encourage you to add something now because if you're anything like me, if you mean to come back to it later, you will forget to. So while people are adding to that, we're just going to go around the breakout groups very quickly to get some headline feedback. So from my group, just to kick us off, really interesting discussion around funding. I think we've got a couple of really good candidates for mentees. Matt, so a couple of people I was really suggesting apply to receive some mentoring support to help with the funding. So we'll reshare the links now to apply both to be a mentee, so to receive that support, or to be a mentor, to receive payment to provide support to another organisation in the Northwest. We also talked about the challenges of getting funding for the maintenance of nature-based solutions and a suggestion that corporate funding and something that involves volunteers and perhaps focusing more actually on the skills that will be achieved through that, because the corporate sponsors always want something new. So it's really challenging to get that funding for maintenance. But if it involves upskilling volunteers, that could be something very appealing. Matt, do you want to give us a headline feedback from your group?
Yeah, we've had lots of great discussions. One in terms of how a voluntary group can tackle 20 acres of rhododendron. People had lots of ideas such as invasive species specific funding, working with local authorities to signpost, but also breaking down big nature projects into smaller chunks and working with potentially different local partners or businesses or local land ecologists to tackle those problems.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. And Simon, from your group.
Sure, Rich had some really great advice for us and some good questions, but one that really kind of sticks in my head. Mandy, if you don't mind me using your example, a councillor from Manchester has the capital funds for a toilet in a park, but not the revenue funds to maintain them, to keep them open. And Rich's suggestion was, why don't you invite a kind of pop-up coffee bar to come and be placed in that park to sell the coffee, but rather than them paying rent, they have a responsibility for maintaining and keeping the toilets open. So Mandy gets her toilet, which is open, which allows volunteers to come and use the park. And we also get great coffee at the same time. So a really good solution. There were many more technical solutions that Rich talked us through, but that one particularly stayed in my mind. And thank you very much, Rich, for all of that insight.
That's a brilliant idea. And if that comes off, do please share with us. We'd love to hear about that. And now I know we're throwing a lot of external links at you, but before you go, we're going to share another poll via Mentimeter that we would really appreciate your time filling in. It's really to get your feedback. We're going to be running these workshops throughout this year. We've got another 3 planned for this calendar year. We've got some ideas of topics, but we really want to make them as useful to you as possible. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. So Mass has just shared that link in the chat now. We'd be really grateful if you could fill that in before you leave this call. But just to outline for you, so our next workshop will be end of May, early June. We haven't quite set the date yet. That's going to be focusing on partnership working. And it sounds as though we've got lots of food for thought on that from today's session, which is fantastic. Then another session in September, looking at some of the technical aspects of nature-based solutions and also touching on procurement issues. And then the final one for this calendar year of events will be in December. And our likely topic for that is all around maintenance and monitoring and evaluation. But we'd love to hear from you if you've got something you'd like to share on any of those topics, if you've got speakers you'd like to recommend, or indeed if there are other topics you'd like us to touch on that we haven't referenced. As I said, we want to make these sessions as useful to you as possible. And we will come back to that Padlet board at future sessions and look at that and see about possibly brokering some introductions and where there might be potential fruitful partnerships forming. And I think that's all from us, other than to say another huge thank you to all our speakers, to all of you for joining us. And we really hope we'll see you at our next session in the early summer. Thank you very, very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.